Once upon a time in ancient times, there was a conflict of epic proportions that shook the kingdom of Judah to its core. Imagine a dark night where the city of Jerusalem was surrounded by an immense and fearsome army, led by one of the greatest conquerors of his time. Have you heard of an angel who, in a single act, decimated 185,000 soldiers? Yes, we are about to explore one of the most incredible and surprising stories of the Bible. In this video, we are going to dive into the events that led to that divine intervention, understand the historical and cultural context, and discover the profound lessons we can learn from this story. If you're curious about how a single angel can change the course of history and want to understand the impact of this narrative in the ancient world and today, keep watching. Let's unravel together the mystery behind the angel who killed 185,000 soldiers in a single night. In the late 8th century BC, the political landscape of the Middle East was in constant turmoil. The kingdom of Judah, ruled by King Hezekiah, faced a crushing threat from the Assyrian Empire, one of the most feared military powers of the time. Assyria, under the command of King Sennacherib, was in the midst of territorial expansion, subjugating nations and cities with its relentless war machine. Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, became a strategic target for the Assyrians. The city was not only a political center but also a religious and cultural symbol, housing Solomon's temple, one of the holiest sites for the Israelites. The pressure on Hezekiah was immense, as he had to protect his people and preserve the spiritual heart of his nation. Jerusalem, with its imposing walls, was a bastion of resistance and faith. The people of Judah were deeply rooted in their religious traditions, with an unshakable belief in the power and protection of God. However, the Assyrian threat was real and palpable, causing fear and uncertainty among the inhabitants. King Hezekiah, known for his devotion to God, carried out significant religious reforms, removing idols and rededicating the temple to the exclusive worship of the Lord. He sought to strengthen the people's faith, encouraging them to trust in divine providence, even in the face of an apparently invincible enemy. The city was in a constant state of vigilance, with its walls being reinforced and provisions being stored for a possible prolonged siege. In the midst of this tension, the figure of the prophet Isaiah emerges. A man of deep spirituality and vision, Isaiah played a crucial role during Hezekiah's reign. His presence was a beacon of hope and guidance for the king and the people. Isaiah was not just a spiritual advisor, but also a spokesperson for God, bringing messages of warning and hope. Isaiah's prophecies often defied human logic, but were grounded in unshakable faith in God's power. He proclaimed that despite external threats, God was in control and would protect his people. His words brought comfort and courage in times of despair, reminding the people of Judah that they were not alone in their struggle. King Sennacherib, with his massive army, advanced towards Jerusalem with confidence and cruelty. His previous campaigns had been successful, conquering cities and kingdoms, imposing heavy tributes, and spreading terror. The siege of Jerusalem was, for him, just another conquest on his growing list of victories. The situation in Jerusalem was desperate. The Assyrian forces surrounded the city, blocking supplies and waiting for hunger and desperation to force the Jews to surrender. The city was under siege, with tension rising every day. The siege brought a climate of fear and uncertainty, and the pressure on Hezekiah and his advisors was immense. In response, Hezekiah took practical and spiritual measures. He fortified the city's defenses, repaired the walls, and prepared Jerusalem for a prolonged siege. But more importantly, he sought refuge in his faith. Hezekiah went to the temple, praying fervently to God for help and intervention. He knew that, humanly speaking, Jerusalem could not withstand the Assyrian power for long. The siege continued, and the Assyrians intensified their campaign of intimidation. Letters were sent to Hezekiah, containing threats and blasphemies, challenging God's ability to protect his people. Sennacherib was confident that surrender was only a matter of time, and his arrogance knew no bounds. Hezekiah's response to these threats was to turn even more towards God. He took Sennacherib's letters to the temple, spreading them before God in a sincere and desperate prayer. He implored God for help, acknowledging Judah's helplessness against Assyrian power and asking for divine intervention. Hezekiah prayed, "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, who is enthroned above the cherubim, you are God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Incline, O Lord, your ear and hear. Open, O Lord, your eyes and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Now, therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord." God's response came through the prophet Isaiah, bringing a message of hope and assurance. Isaiah prophesied that God had heard Hezekiah's prayer, and that Sennacherib would not enter Jerusalem. God promised to protect the city, and that the Assyrian army would be defeated in an unimaginable way. That night, something extraordinary happened. An angel of the Lord descended upon the Assyrian camp, and in an act of divine power, 185,000 soldiers were killed. The deadly silence of the night was broken by God's power, and when morning came, the few surviving Assyrians woke up to a scene of desolation and death. The Bible describes this event simply but powerfully. That very night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the others rose early in the morning, behold, all these were dead bodies. The immediate impact was overwhelming. The once invincible Assyrian army was destroyed. Sennacherib, who had boasted of his strength and power, was forced to retreat in disgrace, returning to Nineveh humiliated and defeated. Jerusalem was safe, and the people of Judah celebrated God's miraculous intervention. But what really happened that night? How to explain such an extraordinary event? For the faithful, it was a clear sign of divine intervention, a manifestation of God's power in response to the sincere prayers of his people. The story became a powerful testimony of faith and divine providence, reminding everyone that no matter how desperate the situation, God has the power to save. The dawn brought not only the vision of a decimated enemy army, but also a rebirth of hope and faith for the people of Judah. The divine intervention was not just a military victory, but a spiritual milestone that left a deep and lasting impact on the nation. The relief in Jerusalem was palpable. The city's inhabitants, who had lived through days of fear and uncertainty, now breathed an air of relief and gratitude. The walls, once surrounded by relentless enemies, now protected a city free from the imminent threat. This miracle reinforced the people's faith in God, reminding them that despite the hardships, divine protection was always present. Hezekiah's faith was deeply renewed. He who had fervently sought God's help saw his trust spectacularly rewarded. His reign was marked by a religious revival, with an even greater commitment to the laws and traditions of his ancestors. The religious reforms he had already initiated gained new vigor, and the people of Judah followed his example, dedicating themselves more intensely to worship and obedience to God. The political repercussions of the event were also significant. Sennacherib's defeat shook the perception of Assyrian power in the region. Other nations, which had previously seen Assyria as invincible, began to question their own vulnerability. The story of divine intervention in Jerusalem spread quickly, becoming a living legend that resonated throughout the Middle East. The power of God, manifested so dramatically, inspired not only Judah, but also other nations to recognize the strength and sovereignty of the God of Israel. While Jerusalem celebrated its liberation, Sennacherib's return to Nineveh was marked by disgrace and shame. He who had boasted of his conquests and power returned with a decimated army and a tarnished reputation. Sennacherib's humiliation was a hard blow to Assyrian pride. The Bible tells us that after his defeat, Sennacherib was killed by his own sons while worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch. This act of betrayal within his own family symbolized the collapse of the power he so cherished. His death brought an era of instability and internal conflict in Assyria, further weakening the empire he had fought to expand. For Judah, Sennacherib's death was a demonstration that those who defy God and his people face severe consequences. The fall of the Assyrian king was seen as divine justice being fulfilled, proof that God's power extended not only in miraculous acts, but also in directing the destinies of kings and nations. The story of the angel who killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers has been the subject of countless theological interpretations over the centuries. Theologians and Bible scholars see this event as a clear manifestation of divine power and justice. It is a story that highlights God's sovereignty over all nations and his ability to intervene directly and powerfully on behalf of his people. For many, the narrative is a reminder that faith in God can bring miracles in times of great need. Hezekiah's prayer and the divine response illustrate the importance of devotion and absolute trust in God, even when circumstances seem desperate. It is an example of how faith can move mountains and bring salvation in times of crisis. Other theologians highlight the aspect of divine justice. The defeat of the Assyrians and Sennacherib's subsequent death are seen as acts of divine retribution against those who defy and blaspheme against God. It is a reminder that although God is merciful and patient, He is also just and punishes iniquity. The story of the angel who killed 185,000 soldiers is not isolated in the Scriptures. There are other supernatural events in the Bible that demonstrate God's power in equally impressive ways. One such story is the parting of the Red Sea, where Moses, leading the Israelites out of Egypt, saw the sea open so they could pass safely, while the Egyptian army was swallowed by the waters. Another example is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God, in response to the city's iniquity, brought total destruction through fire and brimstone. Just as in the case of the Assyrians, these events serve to demonstrate God's sovereignty and justice, as well as His power to protect and save His people. Comparing these miracles, we see a clear pattern of divine intervention in critical moments. In each case, faith and obedience to God's call resulted in salvation and victory, while disobedience and blasphemy resulted in destruction and defeat. These events reinforce the Bible's central message: God is sovereign, powerful, and just. The story of the angel who killed 185,000 enemy soldiers is more than a tale of a miraculous event. It is an incredible reminder of faith, divine providence, and God's justice. This narrative, deeply rooted in biblical history and theology, continues to inspire and teach valuable lessons about faith and trust in God. This extraordinary event not only saved a city and its people, but also left an indelible mark on the history of Judah and the collective consciousness of believers. It serves as an eternal testimony that no matter how desperate the situation, faith in God can bring unimaginable solutions and divine protection. For today's viewers, this story is an invitation to reflect on their own faith and trust in times of crisis. It is a call to remember that just as God intervened for Hezekiah and Jerusalem, He can intervene in our lives in equally powerful and transformative ways. May we learn from this historical event and strengthen our faith, trusting that God is always present, ready to save and guide us. Amen.